There was a day, not so long ago, when the words small cell lung cancer felt like a death sentence.
But not anymore. If you asked about small cell lung cancer even 5 years ago, options were limited. But today, thanks to clinical trials and the patients who participate in them, there are a number of new treatments that you should know about.
So today we'll explore those promising new therapies, we'll talk to experts making it all happen, and we're going to hear from someone whose life has been changed as a result.
You have to have hope. You have to not dwell in despair because new treatments are coming around every day. And the research is just so promising on what's going to be the next best thing. So that's what I would tell folks. Don't dwell in despair. Always have hope.
Lung cancer is a tough topic. It's a disease that affects patients, families, friends, co-workers. But first, it's a disease that affects people.
Advances in lung cancer treatments over the last few years have made it possible to live with lung cancer for years after diagnosis.
The Hope with Answers Living with Lung Cancer podcast brings you stories about people living, truly living with lung cancer. The researchers dedicated to finding new breakthrough treatments, and others who are working to bring hope into the lung cancer experience.
In today's edition of Lung Cancer Foundation of America's Hope with Answers podcast, we'll unpack new treatment options for those with small cell lung cancer.
We're going to hear from a patient who has firsthand experience in just a bit. But first, we're going to hear from Dr. Jacob Sands. He's an oncologist who specializes in lung cancer at the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute in Boston. Dr. Sands, it's so great to see you. I'd like to talk to you first about the basics. How do you describe small cell lung cancer?
Well, that's kind of a big one, even though it's basic. So broadly, small cell lung cancer is a type of lung cancer. It's a neuroendocrine type of lung cancer that tends to grow rapidly. And so initially when we treat it, it responds great and it can shrink very rapidly. But once it becomes resistant, which can be after many lines of therapy, but when it grows, it can grow rapidly. I think that's kind of a basic way of explaining what is actually a pretty big topic.
And when you say lines of therapy, you're talking about different forms of treatment. Once the cancer becomes resistant to one, you try another one. That's considered a second line. Is that right?
That's exactly right. So we start treatment with an initial, whatever the first regimen is, the first treatment kind of recipe, if I can use that. We treat with and we monitor. And once the cancer grows, then we go on to second line and so on.
Doctor, you mentioned that small cell lung cancer moves incredibly fast. How do you prepare patients for this particularly aggressive diagnosis?
Well, this is a complicated and very individualized thing. I think, first of all, when people hear the word cancer, it doesn't matter what the cancer type is. It often the world and the room swirls around them. And in a lot of ways, my interaction with patients is kind of what's going on for them and helping them to get their feet on the ground. But relative to then small cell lung cancer is essentially giving them what feels a bit like the map. It's not to say where exactly we will go, but it's the map that exists. It's the kind of the space and the possibilities and what is a realistic potential. The normal question is, well, how is this going to go? But here is the realistic possibility. And thankfully, with some advances in the last 10 years and even more recently, those possibilities and the potential for longer disease control that goes on for years is far more realistically possible for patients. Now, I also highlight that there is a worst possible case or worst realistically possible case on the short end of that spectrum, and that can be months. I mean, this disease can really be very tragically short in time frame. Thankfully, that's not particularly common because the treatments tend to work very well from the beginning. And so it's really a matter of laying that out. So for anyone who's listening, if you experience being at the doctor's or with a loved one, experience being at a doctor's office and they're talking to you and like it makes logical sense, but it kind of doesn't register, I think that's actually more the norm. And so you should feel free going back to asking certain questions and such if you didn't catch it, because it's actually really hard to have that discussion and process what is frankly just an unacceptable reality.
I think that's true. It's one of the reasons we love doing this podcast, because people can go back and listen and hear those answers. And it is true. When you hear cancer, the first thing you think is, how long do I have? And then your mind goes to all the different things in your life and will you be able to do them? So I love that you put it in that context. You know, in the past several years, the treatment landscape for small cell lung cancer has just changed dramatically. Can you walk us through what's changed at a really high level? Then we're going to get into the specifics, but at a really high level that's giving patients that hope that you just talked about.
Well, I love this question because there is so much that's gone on. And I don't think many physicians outside of oncology even realize the progress that has been made in the treatment of patients with lung cancer and many other cancers. But I specialize in lungs, so I'm particularly familiar with those. You know, anyone diagnosed with lung cancer, with rare exception at this point, non-small cell or small cell, almost everybody is getting a drug that is new within the last 5 to 10 years. Now, if we focus on small cell lung cancer, we had decades of not much changing. And then around 8 years ago, 7, 8 years ago is where we saw the first really big change in that the checkpoint inhibitors, a kind of immunotherapy, entered the first line, meaning starting treatment with the initial chemotherapy plus an immunotherapy. And the magic of that is that there's a subset of patients that end up with years of ongoing disease control. I have patients that are more than 5 years out from that initial discussion, doing great, living their lives, at this point not on treatment. And I'll go as far as to say that I think there are some patients that are cured of their incurable disease. It is a lottery ticket where the odds of winning are far better than the lottery, but it's not everybody. And so it still is really a subset. The majority of people treated on that first line treatment, the cancer grows and we go on to second line treatment. But that was a huge advance. Now, about 5 years ago, we had a completely new drug get approved in lurbinectedin. That was a new second line treatment as another type of chemotherapy and you know, a bit better tolerated than the other chemo regimens, and another option to add. And then more recently, we've seen the T-cell engagers that have shown incredible promise. Tarlatamab got FDA approved last year. This is an immunotherapy that grabs immune cells and grabs the tumor cells, bringing them together and introducing the immune system to the cancer cells. And in some patients, they really end up having very long control again on this kind of immunotherapy. And so this has been another very promising regimen. Now, you know, that is just scratching the surface on so much more that's going on in the field. I guess I should also highlight this year we did have lurbinectedin in the maintenance setting of first line, also was a positive trial, showed improved time of disease control, time of survival, and is another option for patients to discuss with their doctors as far as whether that's recommended for them.
Many reasons to be hopeful right now. That's great to hear. Dr. Sands, our patient advocate, who we're going to hear from a little later in this podcast, is really excited about 3 specific treatments. So we'd love to hear from you on these 3 areas. The first one she mentioned is BITE, or BITE. What is BITE and how does it work exactly?
So BITE specifically stands for bispecific T-cell engager. But actually, I'd like to speak more broadly and just say T-cell engagers, because there's a whole class of drugs that are grabbing the tumor cells, grabbing the immune cells, and bringing them together to create that immune response. Those immune cells are the T cells. Now, tarlatamab is a bispecific T-cell engager, and that is FDA approved. But this is the first of a whole class of drugs that I anticipate to be part of our treatment algorithms as different options. There are a number of trials right now looking at combinations of T-cell engagers with other drugs as well.
There's another treatment called a CAR T-cell treatment. And I'm wondering how that works, especially in relation to what you just explained to us about BITE.
Yeah, a little similar, but with distinct differences. But this is very exciting. So CAR T, that technology is currently part of the standard of care for multiple myeloma and some lymphomas. So this is not new technology, but it is certainly new to solid tumors and lung cancer as well. So essentially, we hook patients up and pull out some blood, spin it down so that it separates out all the different blood types. And we basically pull off those immune cells and then give them the rest of their cells back. Now, those immune cells we process, and those immune cells get processed in a way that when we give them back, they're able to recognize the cells that have DLL3. So their own immune cells are the treatment. We've processed them. We then give them some chemo that kind of clears out some of their bone marrow cells so that when we give it back, that new immune system, which is still their immune system, just processed to recognize this receptor that is very common on small cell lung cancer, is we give those cells back, and then that's it. So their own cells then are the treatment, and then we monitor them. So, this is still early. We'll have to see how that plays out. But this is a one-time treatment, albeit far more in the initial kind of collecting cells and preparation and the treatment. But once giving it, when it works, then that's just, monitoring them with scans. That is the treatment. There's no ongoing treatments.
The third treatment that our patient advocate is excited about is ADC, or antibody drug conjugate. Tell us more about that.
Antibody drug conjugates are compounds that are essentially three components. One is the antibody, meaning that it has something that finds a certain receptor and binds to it. Now, in binding to that, the cell then pulls in that compound, it internalizes it, and inside the cell, the linker is holding a payload, or right now what is really a chemotherapy, is holding that to the antibody. So when that compound is pulled into the cell, that chemo is released inside the cell and essentially then kills the cell and spills out. This really represents an exciting way of delivering chemotherapy right to the tumor instead of just as broadly when we give just chemo.
When you describe this, I just get these visuals in my head, and I feel like I almost understand what the heck you're doing, which I know is really simplifying it, but thank you so much for the way you describe that. It's fabulous. I want to ask you about clinical trials. And we still have a lot of people out there who are very suspect of clinical trials. How important are they to these amazing discoveries that you're talking about? What do you tell your patients about clinical trials? And are there new clinical trials for small cell that are on the horizon?
So this is a big topic, the clinical trials. People come in with all different kind of expectations and beliefs of what it means to go on a trial. What I commonly hear people saying, though, is that they come in with the belief that them enrolling to a trial is them kind of giving of themselves for the future. And on some level, that's true, but that is not my goal. I mean, what I tell people is, look, these are options for you. I am entirely focused upon what is the best thing for you. My hope is that this works really well, and it goes on to help a lot of other people after having helped you a lot. And but trials options are only as good as the options themselves. So a trials discussion, it's a matter of, well, what is the trial? And is that trial better for me than going on what is currently a standard of care available trial? And that should be the equation. Now, we've talked a little bit about tarlatamab and the T-cell engagers in general. I've seen a number of patients that have done really remarkably well on these drugs prior to them ever being approved. So I've seen patients that have gotten disease control for years, which was not possible or just highly unlikely on what was the standard of care at that time. But they really benefited from getting, well, something that's now approved before it was ever approved. And so when I'm talking to patients about trials now, it's saying, okay, look, we've got this CAR T trial, this one-time treatment where we process your immune cells, we get them back into you, and that is the treatment. And you come in for what is hopefully what I like to call high five visits, where you come in, scan looks good, high five, see you next time. That is the goal of that trial, is for it to work that way. And if it does work that way, that will become an option in the future. But it is available to them today on a clinical trial. But the one takeaway in all of that I'd want people to know is that if you're going on a trial, that should be entirely focused on what is the best option for you. Does that trial look promising enough that it looks like it's better for you to go on that than any of the currently available regimens?
You mentioned some promising treatments for small cell lung cancer, but you also talked earlier about when a patient is sitting in their doctor's office and they've just learned that they have small cell lung cancer, their head is swirling. What should our viewers, our listeners, be asking their doctors about these new treatments?
Well, that's very personal and individualized, I guess I should say, because it depends on what they're looking for. But I guess what I'd start with is for these individuals to try to kind of recognize what it is they believe about these treatments. My job in first meeting someone is often to try to get a sense of what is it that's driving them in this discussion. Many patients, I'll often highlight, many patients believe that if they get chemotherapy, they're going to be laid up in bed vomiting without hair. And I say it specifically like that to just, anything I say, I want to be really blunt. But a lot of people say, well, yeah, isn't that how it goes? And the first line of treatment for small cell lung cancer does cause people to lose hair. But, 15, 20 years ago, the big advance was the anti-nausea medication. And that's not to say nobody gets nausea. That certainly can come up, but it is far more mild than what most people expect. And most people are really not vomiting. And most people don't really even need some of the medication we have for nausea because it's just a non-issue. And so discussing those kinds, starting out with, okay, don't just give me the list of possible side effects. What kind of side effects do you expect me to have? Now, what I often will say is, when we talk about the side effects, I'll say, look, if I were to ask you what's going to happen on my drive home, you'd probably say, you might hit some traffic, but you'll get home. And if I say, well, what are all the things that can happen on my drive home? Well, that becomes a really long, scary list. Now, obviously, there is no comparing a drive home to being treated for cancer. Those are two completely different things. But hopefully the analogy, helps the viewers, and often for patients, it helps them to just understand, okay, when we go through this list of possible side effects, that is not to say that I'm going to have all of those things. And it's not to say that any of them are going to be extreme necessarily. These are just the possibilities. Like a drive home, what are the possibilities? And what do you expect to happen? What are the more likely scenarios instead of what are the whole realm of possibilities? And then, what it ultimately comes down to is, okay, what kind of benefit do you anticipate? And what kind of side effects do you anticipate? And what are the options that you would be putting in front of your own family member? Now, most oncologists are already doing that. They're giving the options that they would give their own family members. But sometimes patients will say, okay, well, with these, what would you say to your mom or your dad or your uncle or something like that? And now I talk with patients really that casually and directly as I would with my family members, but that is kind of a way of framing it. But the other part of this is that a decision about treatment is sometimes very personal too, in that, and I'll point this out with patients and saying, look, I can't factor in how far you're driving to get here, or the challenge, if the commute here is long enough that it's really cumbersome, then I'm happy to work with someone who's closer to you in a cancer center near you, where I am kind of a peripheral member of your team. Your oncologist there can reach out to me, but that part of the equation, the oncologist really can't or shouldn't weigh in on that so much, because their commute is not something that affects me, and the amount that affects them is all very individual too.
Well, Dr. Jacob Sands, thank you so much. We appreciate your insight.
Oh, I'm so happy to discuss this with you.
We're joined now by Wendy Brooks from St. Louis. She is living with small cell lung cancer. Wendy, thanks for joining us today and sharing with us.
Wendy, I'm so glad to talk to you. I want to hear more about your journey and how you were diagnosed. Tell us your story.
Well, thank you, Mitch. Thank you, Diane, for having me today and being able to share my story with you and your audience. I was actually diagnosed in, July of 2023, and that was after I had received an annual CT lung screening. I had been very adamant about having annual low-dose CT screenings since my father had lung cancer back in 2013. So it was something that I wanted to do, and my primary care physician was very supportive of that and got me into a lung screening program at my local hospital prior to the age limit that I would have qualified. So I was very fortunate to begin lung screenings early, and I'd had 5 lung screenings that were clear until the 6th one, which was not. And that is exactly how my lung cancer was found.
Do you think the screening saved your life, essentially?
The screening did save my life, without a doubt, Mitch. It was something that I was worried would happen, but you try not to think about it. And when they did tell me that I had lung cancer, they told me it was small cell lung cancer after my biopsy. And I had no idea that there were 2 different types of lung cancer. And when I found out that it was small cell lung cancer and how aggressive that cancer is, if it weren't for that screening, I would not be here today talking with you both.
I think it's so interesting because, there's so much that people don't understand about lung cancer and about small cell lung cancer. What's one thing that you think that's really important that you would like to, tell people that you think maybe even your closest family members might not understand about your disease and what you're going through?
I think it's really important for everybody to understand the uncertainty of this disease. It is something that it's treatable, but there's not a cure. And that is why it's so important that we have research in trying to determine what's causing this and find the treatments that will work to stop it, slow it down, keep us living, keep us enjoying life. So that the uncertainty is the main focus that I try not to dwell on. I try to stay positive, and I support the research that is going to give us a cure for this.
Yep, research is key, and you have a very positive attitude, which I think is fantastic. Does the research, does that give you hope?
Oh, absolutely, without a doubt. When I was first diagnosed 2 years ago, there really weren't a whole lot of treatments that were available. There had been immunotherapy that had come on the scene a few years prior, but as far as the statistics and how well that was treating the disease, there were still some unknowns and really not a whole lot of options. So just in the last 2 years, there's been further treatments that are showing great results that have been approved. And there's other treatments that are in development that I am very excited about for the small cell lung cancer community.
It is a very exciting time if you have to have lung cancer. But we always have to put that caveat in there. When you're talking with people who are newly diagnosed now, what's the one thing you tell them that no one ever told you?
Well, I know everybody said to be hopeful, but that is so key. You have to have hope. You have to not dwell in despair, because new treatments are coming around every day. And the research is just so promising on what's going to be the next best thing. So that's what I would tell folks. Don't dwell in despair. Always have hope, because you never know when your magic bullet is going to arrive.
Let's talk a little bit more about the treatment options available to you, for example. My understanding is you push to be involved in a clinical trial. And I know some people don't really understand clinical trials. Why was that important for you?
It was so important for me to be involved in the clinical trial, Mitch, because that gave me the latest and greatest treatment today, instead of having to wait for formal approval. It's not that you're being treated as a guinea pig when you go into research treatment. You actually get a better standard of care. You're tested more often. You're scanned more often. They're really keeping a close eye on the disease. And if it's not working, having an opportunity to pivot to another treatment is so critical with the aggressiveness of small cell lung cancer.
Were you surprised when you found out that you weren't a guinea pig? I think that so many people have that misperception that they either get treatment or they don't get treatment if they go into a clinical trial, which is not what the case with, especially with cancer trials.
Yes, for me, I knew I was not going to go into a blinded study. So I knew that I was actually going to get the treatment. And that's what's so critical with the different clinical trials, is to determine what type of trial it is. Is it blinded, where you may or may not get the drug? Or is it open and you know exactly what you're going to get? And it may be the type of dose that you're going to receive, whether or not it starts out at a low dose or a higher dose, where they're trying to figure out what the exact dose is for the patient. The open trials are better for me because I do know that I am getting the drug.
And I think it's really important to always say that whatever the best treatment, the standard of care is at the time of the trial, the one set of people always get that standard of care.
Yeah.
Then the other set get the standard of care plus whatever it is that they're testing. So that's really important that people understand that. And that whole guinea pig thing, certainly when I first started this, that's what I thought. And I just find it fascinating that you really are on the cusp of something that's brand new. And especially with small cell lung cancer, there hasn't been that much that's been brand new for that long. So it
Yeah.
is a very hopeful time.
Exactly, exactly. And I've been fortunate to have two different study treatments offered to me that are that brand new cutting edge treatment. And it's done wonderfully for me. I have been able to contain the cancer in my lung and have it not spread to other areas of my body, that's huge, to be able to keep this in one area. Eventually, hopefully, it goes away completely, but not to have that spread has been just a blessing.
Yeah, it's helped you, and being in that clinical trial, of course, helps others down the line. For someone considering a clinical trial, perhaps someone newly diagnosed watching this, listening to this, what is the day-to-day experience of being involved in a clinical trial? Because I wonder if some people think, oh my gosh, I already have enough on my plate. Now we're adding something else. What's it like?
Well, you're going to, if you choose treatment, you're going to get treatment standard of care. And it's not much more than what the standard of care treatment burden would be. Certain clinical trials may have a heavier upfront burden of your time, but as you get into the trial, that burden somewhat releases, and you're back to your normal standard of care every 3 weeks of treatment. There may be more blood tests up front that you would have to provide. But again, as the further you get into the trial, the less burden that is on the patient.
What trials and what new treatments are you so excited about? What's coming down the pike that you know about?
I'm very, very excited about the bite therapy. In fact, that's one therapy that I'm currently on. I'm very excited about the antibody drug conjugate therapies that they're developing. That was another trial that I had been on, but that is a chemotherapy that's targeted directly to the cancer cell, not a broadcast chemotherapy that goes after every fast growing cell. So that's very specific to small cell lung cancer. And I guess the last thing that I'm really looking forward to is a CAR T cell therapy for small cell lung cancer. And that's where they would actually somewhat bioengineer the treatment for each person. They would take your own DNA, your own cancer data, and re-engineer, repair what was broken, and then put that back in your body to where you're fixing yourself.
That is exciting. That's very promising. If someone out there perhaps is not eligible for a specific treatment or a specific trial, rather than just, well, throwing up your hands and walking away, what would you say to them about advocating for yourself? That's important, isn't it?
Yes, it is. You need to be your own advocate, and if you're told that there's nothing that we can do, or there's no treatment for you, seek a second opinion. It is so important to reach out to others. Your oncologist, they're not going to be upset. You're not going to offend them if you're reaching out to seek a second opinion. They may even encourage it and help facilitate that for you. So don't give up, don't despair. If you're told there's nothing more we can do, then that's the time to reach out and look for that second opinion, because a lot of times there is a lot more that can be done.
And are there specific questions you would advise people to ask their oncologist that would be helpful in that regard?
Yes, I would say what new treatments are currently available.
Okay.
Where's the nearest location where I could find this information or receive this treatment? And can you contact me? Get me in contact with someone to further look into this.
That's great advice. Really, really good advice. Wendy, you are so hopeful and positive. How has this whole journey transformed your life and your perspective on looking at your future years?
It's definitely smacked me right in the face with mortality. That is something that you do realize when you're given a cancer diagnosis like this, that we're not going to live forever. And although we knew that innately, we just didn't dwell on it. And I still, it took me a while to get back to that pre-cancer diagnosis philosophy of not dwelling on your mortality every day, because that is something that once you get that, then the diagnosis, then you are just, oh no, how much time, what is left? But you have to realize too, we don't know. The doctors don't know. And you have to live each day with purpose. And find even just in the small little things, find the joy. And that's what keeps me going and keeps me positive and hopeful. It's not going to do me any good to worry about, oh my gosh, is today the day that I won't be here tomorrow? That's not helpful. It's more helpful to say, okay, today is a great day. What can I get accomplished? What can I do?
Well, you can't help but be moved by Wendy's incredible spirit. Her positivity really shines through and fuels her strength to keep going.
We are so grateful to Wendy and to Dr. Jacob Sands for their heartfelt insight and for being such powerful advocates for everyone facing a lung cancer diagnosis.
Thank you for joining us on Hope with Answers, Living with Lung Cancer. If today's discussion resonated with you, please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts to stay updated on breakthrough research and inspiring stories. Visit lcfamerica.org for resources on clinical trials and treatment advances. And connect with LCFA's community on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, where your story might inspire others facing similar challenges. If you found value in today's episode, please share it or leave a review. These small actions help more people discover potentially life-changing information. Together, we're advancing science and empowering hope, one conversation at a time.